The sun was setting over New Colony, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Jack had learned to love over the past 3 years. He stood on the roof of the water treatment plant, his hands covered in grease, watching the twin moons rise over the distant mountains. Somewhere out there, past those mountains and past the stars themselves, was Earth, a planet he was beginning to think he would never see again. 3 years. That was how long they had been alone on 7B. 3 years since the solar storm had destroyed their communication satellites and cut them off from the rest of humanity. 3 years of silence from a civilization that had promised to support them. Jack climbed down from the roof and wiped his hands on his worn work pants. The water purifier was working again, at least for now. He had rebuilt it so many times that it was more tape and hope than actual machinery. But it worked. That was all that mattered. He walked through the colony as the streetlights flickered on, powered by solar panels that he had repaired dozens of times. New was not a beautiful place. The buildings were simple structures made of local stone and imported steel. The streets were packed dirt. The gardens were functional, not decorative, growing vegetables and grains that kept 2,000 people alive. But it was home. It had become home in ways that surprised Jack. He had come here as a military engineer, expecting a 2-year assignment before returning to Earth. Now he could not imagine leaving, even if leaving became possible. Tors was waiting for him outside the community hall. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray streaks in her dark hair that had not been there 3 years ago. Leading a colony through abandonment had aged her, but it had also made her stronger than anyone Jack had ever known. "The purifier?" she asked. "Running," Jack said, "for now." Nodded. She had learned not to expect permanent solutions. Everything on 7B was temporary, held together by the determination of people who refused to give up. "Town meeting in an hour," she said. "Ben picked up something strange on his equipment. Probably nothing, but people are talking." Jack frowned. Ben was the colony's communications technician, a young man who had never stopped trying to contact Earth despite everyone telling him it was pointless. He spent his nights in a small shack filled with salvaged radio equipment, sending signals into the void and listening for answers that never came. "What kind of something?" Jack asked. He would not say, wanted to wait until the meeting. Paused, and Jack saw something in her eyes that he had not seen in a long time. It might have been hope, it might have been fear. He looked scared, Jack. The community hall was full by the time the meeting started. 2,000 people could not all fit inside, so many stood outside, listening through open windows. Jack stood near the back with Kate, the colony's chief medical officer. Kate was a tall woman with kind eyes and steady hands, the sort of person who made others feel calm just by being nearby. "Any idea what this is about?" she whispered. Jack shook his head, stood at the front of the room and raised her hand for silence. The crowd quieted quickly. They had learned to listen when spoke. "Most of you know Ben," she began. "He has spent 3 years trying to reach Earth, trying to let someone know we are still alive out here. Tonight he picked up a signal. Ben, tell them what you found." Ben stepped forward. He was barely 25, thin and pale from spending too much time indoors with his equipment. His hands were shaking. "It is not from Earth," he said. "The signal I picked up is not human." The room went silent. Jack felt his stomach drop. "I have been analyzing it for 6 hours," Ben continued. "The frequency, the pattern, the encoding. Nothing matches anything in our databases. Nothing matches anything humanity has ever created." He paused, swallowing hard. "Something is entering our system, something that is not us." The silence broke into chaos. People shouted questions, demanded answers, expressed fears that had lived in the back of everyone's mind since humanity first reached for the stars. Were they alone in the universe? The answer, it seemed, was no. Raised her hand again, and slowly the room quieted. "We do not know what this means," she said. "We do not know if this is a threat or an opportunity. What we do know is that we have survived 3 years on our own. We have built something here, something worth protecting. Whatever comes next, we will face it together." Jack watched the faces around him. He saw fear, yes, but he also saw something else. He saw determination. These were not the same people who had arrived on 7B full of hope and naive expectations. These were survivors. They had been tested by loneliness, by hardship, by the feeling of being forgotten by everyone they had ever known, and they had not broken. After the meeting, Jack walked with Kate through the quiet streets. The twin moons were high now, casting silver light over the colony. "Do you think it is dangerous?" Kate asked. "Whatever is out there?" Jack thought about the question for a long moment. "I think anything that crosses the vastness of space to find a tiny colony on an unimportant planet probably has a reason. Whether that reason is good or bad for us, I cannot say." Kate nodded slowly. "We should prepare for the worst." "We should," Jack agreed. "But we have been preparing for the worst since the day the satellites went dark. That is all we know how to do anymore." He looked up at the stars, those countless points of light that suddenly seemed less empty than before. Somewhere out there, something was coming, something that would change everything. For 3 years, the colonists of Nu had believed that no one would come for them. They had accepted their isolation and made peace with being forgotten. Now it seemed they had been wrong. Someone was coming. Jack just hoped they would live long enough to find out who. The ship appeared at dawn. Jack was checking the eastern perimeter fence when he saw it, a shadow that blocked out the rising sun. At first his mind refused to understand what he was seeing. It was too large, too strange, too impossible. But then the shadow moved, descending through the clouds like a predator dropping from the sky, and Jack understood that everything had changed. The vessel was nearly 2 kilometers long, covered in what looked like black metallic scales that shifted and rippled as it moved. It was organic somehow, alive in a way that made Jack's skin crawl. This was not human engineering. This was something else entirely. He ran. By the time he reached the community hall, half the colony was already gathered outside, staring up at the thing that now hung motionless above their homes. Children cried and clung to their parents. Old men and women who had survived wars on Earth stood in stunned silence. Was on the steps of the hall, her face pale but her voice steady as she tried to maintain calm. "Everyone stay together," she called out. "We do not know what this is yet. We do not know what it wants." They found out soon enough. The broadcast came through every speaker in the colony, every radio, every piece of electronic equipment that could receive a signal. The voice was cold and precise, speaking in perfect English that somehow made it more terrifying. "Inhabitants of this world, your planet now belongs to the Empire. You will surrender unconditionally. You will submit to processing and assignment. Resistance will result in termination. You have 12 hours to comply." The message repeated 3 times, then stopped. Jack found in her office, sitting behind her desk with her head in her hands. Kate was with her, along with Ben and a handful of other colony leaders. No one was speaking. "Processing an assignment," Kate said finally. "What do you think that means?" "Nothing good," Jack replied. "Species that ask nicely do not arrive in ships like that." Looked up, her eyes were red but her jaw was set. "We need to decide what to do. 12 hours is not much time." "What choices do we have?" Ben asked. "We have no weapons that could touch that ship. We have no way to escape. We have no way to call for help." "We could surrender," someone suggested. "Maybe they will be merciful." Jack shook his head. "Mercy is a human concept. We do not know if they even understand it, and their message did not offer mercy. It offered submission or death." "Then we die fighting," said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "I did not survive 3 years of abandonment to kneel before the first monster that comes out of the sky," she continued, her voice growing stronger. I did not watch this colony struggle and starve and rebuild itself just to hand it over to creatures who see us as something to be processed. She stood up, and in that moment she seemed taller than Jack had ever seen her. If we are going to die, we die standing. We die human. The town meeting that night was unlike any before, stood before the colony and explained the situation clearly and honestly. She did not hide the danger. She did not offer false hope. She simply told them the truth and asked them to choose. I will not make this decision for you, she said. This is your lives, your families, your futures. Some of you may want to surrender and hope for the best. I will not judge you for that, but I want you to know where I stand. I will fight. I will fight because I believe that what we have built here matters. I will fight because I believe that humanity does not kneel. And I will fight because I would rather die free than live as a slave to something that sees me as less than an animal. The vote was not unanimous. 37 people chose to surrender, arranged for them to be taken to the far edge of the colony, away from the fighting that was to come. She did not blame them. Fear was natural. Surrender was understandable. But nearly 2,000 people chose to fight. Jack spent the night organizing defenses with anyone who would listen. They had no real weapons, nothing that could threaten a ship that size, but they had mining explosives. They had farming equipment that could be turned into barricades. They had the knowledge of their land, every hill and valley and hidden path. And they had something else, something that Jack was beginning to realize might matter more than guns or bombs. They had nothing left to lose. As the hours ticked down, Ben came running from his communication shack with wild eyes. I picked up something else, he gasped. Another signal, faint, very faint, but definitely there. Jack asked. No, Ben shook his head, a strange smile spreading across his face. Human, someone is coming, someone heard us. Jack grabbed Ben by the shoulders. How long? I do not know, days maybe, a week at most. Days. They had 12 hours before the deadline. Whatever help was coming would arrive too late unless they could survive long enough to meet it. Jack turned to, who had heard everything. Her eyes were shining with something that might have been tears or might have been fire. Then we hold, she said. We hold until help arrives or until we are all dead. Either way, we show these monsters what humans are made of. High above the colony, aboard the vessel that the colonists had begun calling the Leviathan, Commander Al reviewed the scan data with growing impatience. These humans were primitive, barely capable of interstellar travel. Their colony had no defenses worth mentioning. This should have been routine. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander, studied the same data with more curiosity than contempt. They are preparing to resist, she observed. Fascinating. Foolish, Al corrected. They have no chance of survival. No, agreed, but they are choosing to fight anyway. That is interesting. Al dismissed her observation with a wave of his clawed hand. He had conquered 47 worlds. He had broken species far more advanced than these soft-skinned apes. Whatever resistance they offered would be crushed within hours. He did not know that he was wrong. He did not understand what humanity became when pushed to the edge of extinction. He would learn. The 12 hours passed like minutes. Jack had not slept. None of them had. Every moment was spent preparing, planning, and praying to whatever god still listened to a forgotten colony on the edge of space. The streets that had been quiet and peaceful were now lined with barricades made from overturned vehicles and stacked stone. The mining explosives had been buried at key points throughout the colony, ready to be triggered when the enemy advanced. Farmers who had never held anything more dangerous than a shovel now carried hunting rifles and improvised weapons. Found Jack on the eastern wall as the deadline approached. The sky was growing dark, and the Leviathan hung above them like a second moon, vast and terrible. Kate has the medical center ready, she said. We turned the school into a triage point. The children are in the underground storage bunkers with the elderly. Good, Jack said. He did not look at her. He could not stop watching the sky. Jack, put her hand on his arm. "Whatever happens, thank you for everything you have done for this colony." He finally turned to face her. In the dim light, she looked tired and scared and more human than he had ever seen her. "We are not dead yet," he said. "Save the thank yous for later." A young man appeared beside them, breathing hard from running. Tyler Vance was barely 18, one of the youngest adults in the colony. He had been born on Earth but raised here, caught between two worlds and now facing the end of both. "I have an idea," Tyler said. "The shuttle. We still have the atmospheric shuttle, the one we use for supply runs to the northern mountains." "What about it?" Jack asked. "The Leviathan has sensor arrays on its underside. I saw them when the ship descended. If someone flew the shuttle directly into those arrays, it might blind them. Give our people on the ground a better chance." Shook her head immediately. "That would be a suicide mission." "Maybe not," Tyler replied. "The shuttle has an emergency ejection system. If I timed it right, I could eject before impact. The colony has recovery teams that could pick me up." "You would never survive the fall," Jack said. Tyler looked at him with eyes that seemed much older than 18. "Maybe. But right now, that ship can see everything we do. It can target our defenses, our people, our homes. If I can take that away from them, even for a few hours, is not that worth the risk?" Before anyone could answer, the sky lit up with fire. Drop ships descended from the Leviathan, dozens of them, falling through the atmosphere like burning meteors. The invasion had begun. Jack grabbed Tyler's arm. "Go do it and try not to die." Tyler ran. The soldiers hit the ground running. They were tall, almost 7 feet, with gray skin that seemed to absorb the light and 4 arms that ended in razor-sharp claws. Their armor was as organic as their ship, black and shifting, and they carried weapons that fired beams of concentrated energy. They expected easy prey. They expected frightened primitives who would scatter at the first sign of superior force. They found something else entirely. The first wave walked directly into the mining explosives. The ground erupted beneath their feet, sending alien bodies flying through the air. Before they could regroup, gunfire erupted from the barricades. Farmers and engineers and teachers, people who had never fought a battle in their lives, poured bullets into the enemy with desperate fury. Jack coordinated from behind the eastern wall, shouting orders and moving people where they were needed. He watched an old woman named, a grandmother who had been a kindergarten teacher on Earth, reload a hunting rifle with steady hands and put 3 rounds into a soldier who had breached the northern barrier. He watched a teenage boy drag a wounded man to safety, while energy beams scorched the air around him. He watched ordinary people become warriors because they had no other choice. They fell back, regrouped, and pushed forward again. This time they came with heavier weapons, blasting through barricades with concentrated fire. The colonists gave ground slowly, fighting for every meter, leaving traps and ambushes behind them. Kate worked in the medical center without pause, her hands covered in blood that was both red and strange alien purple. The wounded kept coming, some with burns, some with missing limbs, some too far gone to save. She saved the ones she could and grieved the ones she could not. "How many?" asked, appearing at her side between waves of casualties. 63 dead so far," Kate said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "Over 200 wounded, but we are holding. Somehow we are holding." Above the battlefield, Tyler Vance pushed the atmospheric shuttle to its maximum speed. The little craft shook and groaned as he climbed toward the Leviathan, and alarms screamed warnings about stress limits and atmospheric breach. He ignored them all. The sensor array grew larger in his viewport, a mass of organic technology that pulsed with faint light. He could see defense turrets tracking his approach, preparing to fire. He would only get one chance. At the last possible moment, Tyler activated the ejection system. The cockpit exploded outward, throwing him into the thin upper atmosphere as the shuttle continued its final journey. He saw the impact, A brilliant flash of light as the craft smashed into the sensor array, and then he was falling, tumbling through the sky toward a planet that had become his home. The parachute deployed automatically. He drifted down through smoke and fire, watching the battle unfold below him like a terrible dream. And when he finally hit the ground, bruised and bleeding but alive, Jack was there to pull him to safety. "You did it," Jack said, supporting the boy as they limped toward cover. "You actually did it." Above them, the Leviathan hung silent and partially blind, its precise targeting systems reduced to chaos. The ground forces, cut off from orbital support, began to falter. But Commander Al, watching from his damaged bridge, was not finished. He had lost battles before. He had faced unexpected resistance before. What he had never done was lose a war. "Prepare the main batteries," he ordered, his voice cold with fury. "If we cannot take this colony intact, we will burn it from the face of this world." Sub-Commander hesitated. "Sir, that will kill everyone, our own troops as well as the humans." "I do not care." Al turned to face her with eyes that held no mercy. "These creatures must be taught what happens when they defy the Empire. Prepare the batteries." On the ground, received word of the energy buildup in the Leviathan's weapons. She gathered the surviving colonists in the center of town, surrounded by the bodies of friends and the ruins of homes they had built with their own hands. "Whatever happens now," she said, her voice carrying over the sounds of distant fighting, "we showed them who we are. We showed them what humanity can do when we refuse to surrender. Remember that. Remember it for as long as you live, whether that is 50 years or 5 minutes." The sky began to glow as the Leviathan prepared to fire. And then, like a miracle written in light across the darkness, something else appeared in the sky, something human. Help had arrived. The first ship burst out of hyperspace in a flash of blue light that split the darkness like a blade. Then came another, and another, and another. Admiral stood on the bridge of the carrier Resolute Dawn and watched her fleet emerge around her. 15 warships, the largest human battle group ever assembled in the outer colonies. They had pushed their engines past every safety limit, risked catastrophic failure at every jump point, and ignored every regulation that told them to slow down and wait for reinforcements. None of that mattered now. They were here, and they were not too late. "Contact bearing 047, her tactical officer called out. Commander Price was young for his position, barely 30, but his eyes were sharp and his voice was steady. "Alien vessel, designation Leviathan. It is charging weapons." "Then let us get its attention," Admiral said. "All ships engage." On the ground, the colonists watched in stunned silence as the sky transformed into a battlefield. Energy beams and missiles crisscrossed the darkness, explosions bloomed like flowers of light, and the great shadow of the Leviathan seemed to twist and writhe as human weapons found their marks. Jack stood beside, his wounds forgotten, his exhaustion pushed aside by a surge of hope so powerful it felt like pain. "They came," he whispered. "They actually came." "I knew they would," replied, though her voice shook as she said it. "I always knew." They both knew it was a lie. Neither of them had believed rescue would come, but it did not matter now. The lie had kept them alive long enough for the truth to arrive. Commander Al stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Human warships, more than a dozen of them. His intelligence had indicated no significant human military presence in this sector. He had been assured that this colony was isolated, undefended, ripe for conquest. "Return fire," he ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Destroy them all." The Leviathan was vast, powerful beyond anything humanity had ever built. Its weapons could crack a moon. Its armor could withstand asteroid impacts. By all logic, by all military calculation, the human fleet should have been vaporized in seconds. But logic and calculation did not account for what happened next. The human ships split into attack formations. smaller and faster than the lumbering alien vessel. They darted around its weapons' fire, exploited the blind spots left by Tyler's shuttle attack, and struck at vulnerable points with precision that spoke of desperation and skill in equal measure. The destroyer Valiant took the first critical hit, its hull breaching under concentrated fire. Instead of retreating, its captain ordered ramming speed and drove his dying ship directly into one of the Leviathan's weapon batteries. The explosion took out half the alien vessel's portside armament. Admiral watched the Valiant die and felt something cold settle in her chest. These were her people, her responsibility, and she was sending them to their deaths. But there was no other way. The colonists on the surface would not survive another hour if the Leviathan remained operational. "Marine boarding parties prepare to launch," she ordered. "Target the enemy ship's engine section." Commander Price looked at her with surprise. "Admiral, boarding an enemy vessel of that size, the casualties would be enormous." "I know," his voice did not waver. "Do it anyway." The boarding pods launched from the Resolute Dawn like bullets fired at a giant. Most were shot down by point defense systems, their crews killed before they could even reach the enemy hull. But some got through. Enough got through. The fighting inside the Leviathan was unlike anything the human Marines had trained for. The corridors were organic, twisting and shifting like the insides of a living creature. They fought with savage ferocity, using their forearms to wield multiple weapons simultaneously. Bodies piled up on both sides, blood mixing in pools of red and purple. But the Marines pushed forward. They fought with rifles and grenades, and when those ran out, with knives and fists and teeth. They screamed and bled and died, but they did not stop. They did not know how to stop. Sub-Commander watched the battle unfold from a secondary command post deep within the ship. She had studied humanity in the days leading up to this invasion, reading their history files and analyzing their behavior patterns. She had warned Al that these creatures were different, that their apparent weakness hid something dangerous. Now she understood what that something was. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not calculate odds or preserve resources or retreat when victory became unlikely. They fought like they had nothing to lose. They fought like death was not the worst thing that could happen to them. They fought like every battle was personal. It was terrifying and magnificent. Commander Al received the report that human Marines had reached the engine core with cold disbelief. His ship, his beautiful ship that had conquered 47 worlds, was dying around him. Fires burned throughout the lower decks. Life support was failing in sector after sector. The weapons systems that had not been destroyed were running out of power. "Commander," one of his officers said, "we should retreat. We can regroup, return with a larger force." "No," Al's voice was flat, final. "We will not retreat from primitives. We will not be humiliated by apes who should have been conquered in an afternoon." He activated the ship-wide communication system. "All forces, this is your commander. We will fight to the last soldier. We will die before we surrender to these creatures. This is my final order." In the engine core, the human Marines set their charges and prepared to evacuate. There was no time for a clean escape, no safe route back to their ships. Most of them knew they would not make it out. Sergeant Hayes, commanding what remained of her boarding team, looked at the young soldiers around her. Some were crying. Some were praying. All of them were still ready to fight. "For the record," she said, "it has been an honor serving with you. Now let us finish this." They detonated the charges. The Leviathan broke apart in a cascade of explosions that lit up the sky like a new sun. Commander Al died on his bridge, still refusing to believe that his empire had been by creatures he considered barely more than animals. Sub-Commander was thrown into an escape pod by her subordinates and ejected moments before the final explosion. On the ground, the colonists watched the enemy ship die. Some cheered, some wept, some simply stood in silence, too overwhelmed to react. Jack found Tyler sitting against a broken wall, staring up at the sky with tears running down his face. "We did it," the boy said. "We actually did it." Jack sat down beside him. His body ached in 100 places, and he was fairly certain several of his ribs were broken. But he was alive. They were alive. "Yeah," he said quietly, "we did." The battle was over. The Leviathan was destroyed. But as Admiral surveyed the aftermath from her damaged bridge, she knew this was only the beginning. The Empire would learn what had happened here. They would come back with more ships, more soldiers, more determination to crush the species that had dared to resist them. Humanity had won this battle, but the war was just beginning. And somewhere in the wreckage of the Leviathan, floating in an escape pod toward uncertain salvation, Sub-Commander began composing her report. Not about the battle, not about the defeat. About humans, about what they were capable of when pushed to the edge of extinction. It was a warning. Whether anyone would listen remained to be seen. The fires burned for 3 days. Jack walked through what remained of new with slow, careful steps, helping where he could and bearing witness where he could not. The colony that had been his home for years was barely recognizable. Buildings that had taken months to construct lay in ruins. Streets that had once been filled with laughter and the sounds of daily life were now marked with craters and the dark stains of blood, both human and alien. But there were survivors, more than anyone had expected. Of the 2,000 colonists who had chosen to fight, 1,847 had lived to see the dawn after the battle. The rest had given their lives defending their home, their neighbors, their right to exist as free human beings. Their names would be remembered. Jack would make certain of that. The military fleet had paid its own price. 4 ships destroyed, including the Valiant, whose final sacrifice had turned the tide of the space battle. Over 600 personnel lost, Marines and pilots and crew members who had crossed the vastness of space to save people they had never met. Admiral arrived on the surface the morning after the fighting ended. She walked through the ruined colony with and Jack at her side, surveying the damage and speaking quietly with survivors. She was smaller than Jack had expected, a compact woman with gray hair cut short and eyes that held the weight of command. "You should know something," she said as they reached the center of the colony where a temporary memorial had been erected from the debris. "Earth never forgot you. The moment your satellites went dark, people started fighting to send help. It took too long. There was bureaucracy, funding issues, political arguments, but people never stopped trying." Nodded slowly. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes were dry. She had no tears left. "We thought we had been abandoned." "I understand." Looked at the memorial, at the names scratched into metal and stone. "But you should also know that your message reached us. The one you broadcast into space during the battle. We received it on our approach." "What message?" Jack asked. "The one where you declared that humanity does not kneel." The Admiral smiled, a small and tired expression. "It has already been transmitted back to Earth. By tomorrow, every human in the galaxy will have heard it. You gave us something, the 3 of you and everyone who fought beside you. You gave us a reminder of what we are capable of." They found Kate in what remained of the medical center, still treating the wounded even though she had not slept in nearly 4 days. She looked up as they entered, and something in her face softened when she saw that everyone was still alive. "How many more?" asked. 3 critical but stable. The rest will recover." Kate wiped her hands on a cloth that had once been white and was now stained with the evidence of her work. "The Admiral's medical teams have been incredible. Without their supplies, we would have lost dozens more." Jack sat down heavily on an overturned crate. His body was finally beginning to demand payment for everything he had put it through. "What happens now?" Admiral answered from the doorway. "Now we rebuild. Ships are already on their way with supplies, construction equipment, and personnel. Within a month, New will have a full military garrison. Within a year, you will have a proper defense grid." She paused. "The will come back. We need to be ready." The interrogation of Sub-Commander took place aboard the Resolute Dawn, in a secure compartment far from prying eyes. She sat calmly, her 4 hands folded in her lap, her gray skin marked with burns and cuts from her escape from the Leviathan. 2 armed Marines stood at the door, but she paid them no attention. Admiral conducted the questioning personally. "Why did your empire attack this colony?" "Because it was there." His voice was smooth, almost musical. "Because you are a young species expanding into space, and the way is to subjugate or destroy potential rivals before they become threats." "You expected easy prey." "Yes," tilted her head, studying the Admiral with curious eyes. "We were wrong. Commander Al measured your species by your technology, your military assets, your industrial capacity. By those measures, you are primitive, insignificant. But those measures do not capture what you are," leaned forward slightly. "I have studied your history. You have fought wars against yourselves that killed millions. You have survived plagues, famines, and disasters that would have broken other species. And every time you have rebuilt. Every time you have grown stronger." She paused. "My people conquered 47 worlds because we were stronger than those who inhabited them. We have never faced a species that fights harder when it is weakest. We do not know how to defeat that." Considered this for a long moment. "Is that a warning?" "It is an observation." Sat back. "The Empire will send more ships, many more. They will want revenge for this defeat, and they will want to prove that humanity is not the threat you appear to be. What happens next depends on whether your species can maintain the spirit I witnessed on this world, or whether it was merely the desperation of abandoned colonists with nothing left to lose." The Admiral stood. "We will be ready." "Perhaps." Eyes followed her to the door. "I hope so, Admiral, because if you are not, everything that happened here will have been for nothing." 1 week after the battle, called a gathering at the memorial site. Nearly every surviving colonist attended, along with crews from the military ships that remained in orbit. Admiral stood at the back of the crowd, observing but not interfering. This was the colony's moment. Climbed onto a makeshift platform and looked out at the faces before her. Some she had known for years. Some she had met only in the chaos of battle. All of them had become something more than they had been. "We came to this world as settlers," she began. "We came to build homes and raise families and create a new life among the stars. We did not ask to be forgotten. We did not ask to be tested. But when the test came, we did not fail." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The wind carried the smell of smoke and the distant sound of reconstruction crews already beginning their work. "The people we lost cannot be replaced. Their absence will be felt for generations. But I truly believe, that they would be proud of what we accomplished. We showed an empire of conquerors that humanity will not be conquered. We showed the galaxy that our species does not surrender, does not kneel, does not accept that bigger means better or that strength is measured only in weapons and ships." Jack stood near the front of the crowd, with Kate on one side and Tyler on the other. The young man had his arm in a sling from his shuttle crash, but his eyes were clear and focused. "What happens now?" Tyler asked quietly. "We rebuild," Jack replied. "We prepare, and when they come back we beat them again." Continued her speech, her voice carrying across the crowd. "This day will be remembered, not as the day we were rescued, but as the day we proved what humanity can become when we stand together. We are small in the vastness of space. We are young compared to empires that have existed but we have something they do not. We have each other, and we have the will to fight for what matters." Later that evening, Ben found Jack on the roof of the water treatment plant, the same spot where he had stood watching the sunset before everything changed. The equipment below was working again, patched together with parts from the fleet's supplies. "I picked up another signal," Ben said. "Actually, several signals. Other colonies are reporting activity, scouts mostly, but they are out there, watching." Jack nodded. He had expected as much. Then we keep watching too, and we keep building, and when they come, we will be ready. He looked up at the stars, those countless points of light that now held both promise and threat. Somewhere out there, the Empire was planning its revenge. Somewhere out there, other human colonies were preparing for battles of their own. But here, on this battered and rebuilding world, the people of Nu had learned something important. They had learned that humanity was not defined by its technology or its resources or its place on some galactic hierarchy. Humanity was defined by its refusal to give up, its stubborn insistence on surviving, and its ability to find strength in unity. They had thought no one would come. They had been wrong. And when the menacing ship had appeared from the sky, they had discovered something about themselves that no one, not even they themselves, had expected. They were human, and that was enough.